Okay, welcome to the Aseret podcast, exploring how to be 10 times stronger. Today's guest is Dr. Paul Volosov, a renowned human development professional, psychologist, philanthropist, who has founded several companies that support individuals with serious and complex intellectual, mental, behavioral, and dramatic health challenges, with the goal that people, everyone, should and can live satisfying, contributing lives. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
Um, Thank you so much for joining us. So the impetus actually for this conversation was an incredible story that I heard you tell in shul the other day. And I'd love for you to share that with our listeners. And then we'll discuss I think the important and beautiful messages that are really contained in it.
Well, I'm 75 years old now, and this story took place, I think, when I was 11. So for it to have stuck with me all these years, it obviously had a big impact on my life and the way I look at the world. I was 11 years old. It was Yom Kippur night, called Nidre night, and we were waiting for the Chazan to start the Kol Nidre, very solemn Kol Nidre prayer. Now, I grew up in a single parent family, so I never had a seat in shul. I had to find something that was empty. And in the particular shul where I was spending Yom Kippur, the only seats were right at the front row. I guess nobody wanted to sit in the front row, right in front of the rabbi. So I wound up sitting there with my older brother, Michael. And this older gentleman wasn't that he was older to us. I was 11, Michael was 13, and he was probably in his 30s. To us, he was quite old, but he was dressed very poorly. His suit was rumpled and just not clean, and he himself just looked like he was not well put together. And he sat down next to Michael and I, and he pulled out this very old, torn, brown, faded Yom Kippur Machzer. So I was an 11-year-old kid, but I always wanted to do good things. And I said, this doesn't make any sense for this gentleman to be using this very old, worn out Machzer. So I went to where the shul Machzorim were being kept. I got him a new up-to-date Machzer, and I approached him. I said, hey, why use this old, torn, broken down Machzor? Here's a new one. He said, we got a couple minutes till the Chazan gets started. I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about my Machzor. When I was your age, about the war in Europe had been going on for a while, and I was in shul this time, Kol Nidre night, waiting for the Chazan to start Kol Nidre. And as we were waiting and anticipating this very holy procedure, a Nazi cohort marched into the shul. And the leader, the captain, marched up to the bima and called out in a very loud voice, who's in charge here? My father, he says, who was the president of the shul, stood up and said, I am. And the captain pulled out his pistol and shot my father dead. And then he called out again in a loud voice, who's in charge here? For a moment, nobody responded. And then the rabbi got up, looked down at his feet, and quietly said, you are, sir. And he said, correct. Get in line. We're marching out of here. That was the end of Yom Kippur. That was the end of my family. And that was the end of my childhood. And as I waited my turn to get in line, I bent down and I picked up my father's machzor, this machzor, and I carried it with me throughout the Holocaust. And you see these brown spots? This is the only thing that's left of my father. This is his blood. So I'll use this machzor. That was the machzor he wanted to use. Story stuck with me on and off, not every day, of course, but on and off. Whenever I had a challenging moment, something bad happened to me, I thought about that guy and I said, look, my life might be hard, but not like his.
Wow. It's an unbelievable story. Unbelievable story. So many things, so many angles. Maybe we could approach it. I want to just give a little... I think there's one angle I'd like to explore it with you. And, you know, as we do with the Sareth, with looking at revisiting the Ten Commandments and seeing them not as specific commandments, but as they're called in the Torah, the Aseret Devarim, the Dibrot. These are general statements. And the key, I think the golden key to that is, you know, normally in the Torah it says, many times in the Torah it says, Yidaber Hashem el Moshe lemo. God spoke to Moses saying. What's the saying? Why couldn't it just say God spoke to Moses? So saying means go and tell the people. I'm telling you this in order that you should say something. You should go and respond to the people. Now, the problem is that Sinai says, and God spoke all these words saying the same thing. But we were all there. All the people were there. So who did they have to say it on to? So maybe it means future generations. Maybe it means to review. But the Midrash says, no, God was asking for a response. God was in conversation with them and saying, I'm telling you this, what do you think? I want you to respond to me. And one of the ways the Midrash explains this response was whenever God said something negative, they responded with something positive. So when God said, do not murder, they changed, they took that and were like, oh, you mean see the image of God in every person, nurture life, respect the value of life. The one I want to talk about today, and I think is the lens we can look at your story and so much of your story through, is do not be a false witness. Lo ta'aneh b're'echa eid shaker. Don't be a false witness. Now, that's the negative. What's the positive? And the positive is, be a true witness. Be a true witness. Tiyeh eid emet. Be a true witness. In discussing the story with you, you came up with this phrase, which I think is just so important for life, for spiritual life, for being Jewish, for what we stand for. And that is, in seeking the truth, in being a true witness, the truth is not always immediately evident. Right? We saw that in the story with this man. Let's just start with that. What does that mean to you? What are its implications? And how do we go about discovering the truth about people?
So one of the things that I thought about based on that story was who's in charge? This German Nazi officer calls out in his very rough voice, who's in charge? He obviously wanted to communicate that he was in charge. But the gentleman's father, the president of the show, he had an illusion that he was in charge. That illusion was taken away from him very quickly and obviously taken away in front of everybody and sent a message to everybody. You think you're in charge, you think you're the president, you're not in charge. You're dead. Of course, the Nazi officer, he thought he was in charge. I thought about that a lot too. Was he really in charge? I guess in that second, he clearly was in charge. But I always, God's hand certainly was manipulating, maneuvering, doing what a very negative situation, obviously, not something any of us would want to be involved in, but clearly God's hand, history's hand, God's hand in controlling history was involved. And the rabbi really was the one maybe who was in charge. The rabbi stood up. I'm sure he was shaking like a leaf after witnessing that horrible situation. But he determined that he had to do something to save his people. He realized that the Nazi officer wanted only one answer. And he was determined to save his people to the extent that he could, to do what's best for his people. And he had to make literally a life and death decision for his entire congregation. Does he acknowledge that might makes right, the guy holding the pistol, the guy that has all the soldiers at his back, carrying rifles, that makes him in charge. So I better acknowledge that. Or do I stand up and say, no, you're not in charge. You can't violate our rights. Do I fight? Well, I think he made the right decision. I think most people would think he made the right decision because with great trepidation, he said, you, sir, you're in charge. You've got the guns. He didn't say those words, but that was the implication. You've got the guns. You've got the power. You're in charge. At least for this moment, you're in charge. What was the outcome? I don't know for sure, but it sounds like nobody else died that night. The president died. Terrible tragedy, of course. Maybe other people died over the course of time as they were persecuted in concentration camps. I'm sure that's true too. But at least for that night, Yom Kippur may have been over, but at least they were alive. And the shul was able to walk out of the shul on their own feet. So I think he made the right decision. But this issue of who's in charge and what does it mean to be in charge and different levels of being in charge, that was always a big issue to me. Now, the point that you made, Rabbi, about bearing witness, I think the gentleman who told me the story clearly was not a successful person. He was, as I said, he was in this terribly rumpled, old, dirty suit, came to shul Yom Kippur night. He was the least well-dressed person in the shul that I remember. But he had something important to say. And he had some witnessing to do. And he wanted to tell me his story, and he wanted to tell me the story of his machzor. And did he know how much it would have impact on me? I don't know. Maybe not. But he wanted to bear witness to what had happened to him. And then I took on some of that responsibility to bear that same witness, bear that same testimony, and share that story with other people, which I've done from time to time. The story inspired me to get through some difficult times. Maybe it inspires others. It's just a powerful story. Probably There are many, many lessons. Maybe we could talk about some more of those lessons.
Now, one thing I'm thinking about as you speak about who's in control in witness is that when you look at the Ten Commandments, so they're written five on one tablet and five on the other, and the Midrash makes a correspondence between the horizontal, right, 1 and 6, 2 and 7, and of course 9, the one we're talking about, don't be a false witness, is against it corresponds to Shabbat. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. And the Midrash says, because what do we do on Shabbat? We testify. Right? We testify to the fact that God created the world. And God's in control. Right? That's really part of, part of what being a true witness is witnessing this aspect. So I think that's really profound. How do we go about living with this disposition, right? Of not always knowing what we do know and knowing what we don't know, being so aware of what we don't know. When we meet people, when we engage with situations, what do you think about now? How do we keep this in mind?
So I was trained as a psychologist, and I practiced psychology for a number of years. Then I started multiple businesses in the area of behavioral health, and I became a CEO over one of the largest behavioral health companies in the United States. And then I started a special education business, obviously closely related in the sense that the children in our special education schools all have behavioral health challenges. That was the common denominator across all my businesses. So I stopped being a psychologist. I became an entrepreneur and an executive. And the more my company grew and the higher my position became, the more I realized how little I know. And it's kind of a paradox. So you would think in my situation, well, obviously my company was growing, I was growing, and I was learning a lot of things as I built these companies, multiple companies, and that did different things and had to learn about many different things in order to run the companies. You would think, oh, I was learning so much. And the more I learned, the more I realized how little I know. And it's gotten to the point now that I'm 75 years old. It's like I think I almost know nothing. Although many people tell me I seem to know a lot. They can ask me questions about a lot of different things and I have answers, but like it seems like I know nothing. Why? Because there's so much to know. So I think one of the lessons is that a little bit of humility goes a long way. Knowing that you don't know. So I always ask the question of people the professionals I work with. I ask them, what's the difference between being a professional and being a wise man? A professional knows what he knows. A wise man knows that he doesn't know that much.
Oh,
And I think we all need to know that. And the implication of that is, of course, since we know so little, since there's so much that we don't know, and what we don't know so outweighs what we do know, all the assumptions that we make about other people and their motivation and why they act the way they act, they're just assumptions. We can't prove it. We don't have the facts, and we'll never have all the facts. We never have more than a bare pittance of the facts. So judging other people has to be done with great trepidation. As a as a supervisor, as my company got bigger, of course, I supervise more and more people. My company currently employs almost 5,000 people. Obviously, I don't supervise all of them. Um, I supervise just some of the top managers. But because we know so little, any judgments that can be made about other people have to be done carefully. One of the things that I tell people also is that when you write something down, only write down something that you are prepared to testify about in court. So if it's hearsay, if somebody told you something, unless it's there are exceptions to the hearsay rule that allow certain things to be testified in court, particularly by professionals who have obligations to evaluate certain things under the law. So they're allowed to testify things that are hearsay under limited circumstances. But unless you're prepared to testify about something in court, and this goes to your issue of bearing true testimony, don't write it down. If it's not something you're willing to back up by testifying to its truth in court, if your word is not going to be taken in court because you really don't have enough information, you don't have enough proof of your conclusion, don't write it down. Because if it's written down, it could be subpoenaed, it could be found under discovery in any malpractice case. So this idea of knowing what you don't know and having a little humility and only don't go around making all sorts of conclusions that you really have no basis for. The older I get, the fewer conclusions I try to draw. Sometimes I have to draw conclusions. It's part of the job of being an executive. You have to make decisions. So you have to draw conclusions. But if I don't have to draw a conclusion, I try not to.
Fascinating. Wow. I want to go ask you a question. I hope you might not want to answer it, but part of this story is something I did not know about you, is that you lost your father early in it. I think it's a question of when he passed away.
Well, he didn't pass away. My parents were divorced, that he disappeared, so
Oh,
functionally I had one parent, but my other parent basically was not around.
uh-huh. And I guess my question to you is,
He has passed away since. My father would be
okay,
like 100 years old now if he were still alive. So yes, he passed away. But he passed away when he was in his 80s, and
uh-huh.
I was probably in my early 60s.
So maybe if you're willing to share a little bit about with us about the impact that made on your life, and maybe the challenges, and maybe the things that you learned from that and have actually gained
Our free
possibly.
retirement planner shows you where you stand now and
Uh-oh.
how you
I think I just got a bug.
sign up today.
And then
And
there's someone else. That's okay.
I don't know how to get rid of this. Hold on, maybe that'll do it. Oh, I think I got rid of it. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I don't hear it anymore. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So you asking me, I'm only happy to talk about my childhood. Look, I came from a very dysfunctional family, and I mention it because it's important for people to know. Most people don't like to talk about how successful they are because it makes them sound, conceited, or, what makes you think you're so smart or so good or so wonderful. I have a particular reason why I do talk about my success. And that's because I came from a dysfunctional family and I proved many people who didn't really believe that I would amount to much to be wrong. And as a person who I committed a big part of my career to helping, actually, my entire career to helping people who have the most serious and complex behavioral health challenges, um, I lived the message that I think other people might want to copy. And that is, I worked very hard to give people the best possible life that they could have. And I gave up basically on no one. Now, I can't tell you that my company succeeded with every single patient. We did have a few patients where we failed and we had to send them back for, unfortunately, they went back to very bad institutions where they did not receive good treatment. because we failed. But those were very few and far between. Almost all of my patients, and it amounts to thousands of people over the 45 years of my career, failed every place else. They had failed, literally. My company was the option of last resort. If you failed every place else and the government did not know what to do with you because your behavioral challenges were so great, your mental illness was so complex and so profound, or your intellectual disabilities combined with other disabilities, because we specialized in people that had co-occurring occurring disorders, meaning they didn't have one serious diagnosis, they had multiple serious diagnoses. For example, we were the largest provider of mental health and intellectual disability services for people who are deaf. Deafness is a very serious disability because most people who are born deaf in particular never learn to speak or read lips. It's very difficult. If you're born hearing and you lose your hearing over time, then the possibility of learning to read lips and to speak, of course, you know how to speak because you were born hearing. But when a person is born deaf, learning how to speak spoken language and learning how to read lips is extraordinarily difficult. Almost no one is able to do it. Very few people are able to do it. Some do, but very few. So people who are deaf and also suffer from complex mental illness or also suffer from complex intellectual disabilities in addition to their deafness are particularly difficult to treat because you can't use hearing talking therapists. You have to have therapists that can use sign language. So our company specialized in serving people with the most serious and complex challenges, including people with co-occurring disorders, multiple disorders. And we almost gave up on no one. And we believed and we lived it. We didn't believe it. I'll take it back. We didn't believe it. We lived it. It was the way we lived our professional lives, dedicating ourselves to help people that had failed every place else to live a good life. We succeeded very frequently. And how did I get the nerve to do that? I got the nerve to do that because many people expected me not to amount to much, coming from a dysfunctional family, a lot of mental illness in my family, and people who know my family would corroborate that. I'm smiling about it, not because it's funny, but because I feel good to have been able to help thousands of people who were like some of the people in my family who had these terrible problems. As a child, of course, I wasn't able to help those people. I was a child. I didn't have the skills, didn't have the training, didn't have the understanding. But as an adult, never really tried to treat my own family members. That wouldn't be ethical. But I was able to treat literally thousands of other people by myself or through my staff, through my company, to treat thousands of people. So I want to just send the message out there. Yes, I'm a very successful person. If you think that makes me conceited, I don't care. I think what it makes me is a human being who wants other people to know, don't give up. Don't give up if you have a mental illness. Don't give up if you have an intellectual disability. Don't give up if you have a family member that has a mental illness or an intellectual disability or a physical disability or whatever challenges. And we all have challenges. Some people think, oh, I wish I was like that other person because that other person doesn't seem to have any problems. And then you get to know them because that's because you don't know them. But you get to know them, they got all sorts of problems because everybody's got problems. Obviously, some people have worse problems than others. That's true. Not everybody has the same level of problems, but everybody's got problems. Don't give up. Don't give up. I'm bearing witness today. I didn't give up. There were people who didn't give up on me. A lot of people did. There were a few who didn't. I owe them my life. And thousands of people who I helped owe them their lives. Think about what one person. So I'll mention I had I had a rabbi. I went to day school my whole life. Of course, never paid tuition because it came from a family that didn't have any money. So we were always a charity case. He was my teacher for my Rebbe for 2 years. The religious studies teacher for 2 years in seventh and eighth grade. And whatever, he saw something in me. He was a teacher, probably in his 50s when he was my teacher, and he had been a teacher for 30, 35 years by that point. So he had seen so many different hundreds, thousands of previous students, and he saw something in me, and he overlooked some of the rougher edges. And he said, Paul's not a piece of coal. Paul's a diamond in the rough. Most people saw a piece of coal. He saw a diamond in the rough. And he took out his chisel and he cut little pieces here and there and molded me and challenged me and supported me and helped me. And when I graduated from eighth grade, he insisted that I go away to yeshiva in Baltimore. We lived in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, and go away to yeshiva in Baltimore. And he got me in. And of course, they tried to charge my mother tuition, but she didn't have anybody to pay it. So I don't think we ever paid any tuition. But I got a great education, both religiously and secularly, and went on to get a PhD, went on to found multiple businesses, and did very well for myself financially. The purpose of me saying all of this is real simple. Don't give up.
Well, let me ask you this question. It's amazing. It's amazing to listen to you. I've seen you. Yeah, you live up the road. I see you in shul. Like, oh my word! I had no idea. This is just beautiful. Like, wow, this is beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I'm reinforcing what I said at the beginning, and that is, we think we know, but what we know is really so
Oh, boy.
limited. And everybody has a much deeper story. Everybody's complex. Everybody's got secrets. I have tried to have as few secrets as possible. I kind of wear my feelings on my sleeve. I try to be very open, but obviously to the extent that I don't go around telling everyone about my life story. So I guess you could say I do have some secrets.
I asked you a question earlier about, how do we do this? How do we keep this in mind? And I'm realizing that there's a tool. There's actually a tool, and that's questions. Right? Questioning. Here I am. I asked you a question. Would you be prepared to come on this podcast with me? Would you, I have a list of questions here for you, and that's so much part of Jewish life, isn't it? We ask questions. We're the people, we're the people of the book. We're the people of questions. And a question reveals what you don't know. The question is, I don't know. How, I'd love to know. So that's coming to me here. I want to ask you a question based on what you were just speaking about. How, so many people, I know from myself, I think we all know this, when we challenge, when we have limitations, people can help. People can really help. But ultimately, we have to take responsibility ourselves. Right? I'm sure you know that from, unless there are extreme cases, even in mental health and intellectual health, it requires the person to take responsibility for themselves, to work themselves. No, we help people help themselves.
So let me tell you a story about that. This goes back a lot of years. I was asked to speak at a conference as a professional and as an executive of a large behavioral health company. And on the panel, there was one of the younger a younger person in his late 20s, who had a long history of mental illness. Typical mental illness starts in late adolescence, early adulthood, and this was true about this gentleman. So he had been mentally ill, seriously mentally ill for probably 10 years by the time we were we spoke on the panel together. And so we had to prepare for the panel. And as part of the preparation, we sat down before the panel, and I said, "Well, I'm going to say this," and he started saying, "Well, I'm prepared to say that." And then he started telling me about his challenges with depression. And I wasn't his therapist; I was a colleague in the sense that we were going to present together at this panel. And I said to him, "Well, there's a lot of mental illness in my family, and in a sense, I have a mental illness because I also suffer from depression. I'm not mentally ill in the sense that I don't have schizophrenia, not psychotic. I've never had a psychotic break, but I have been depressed since I'm 14. I I was very precocious in everything, and most people don't start experiencing serious depression until late adolescence, early adulthood. But I realized I didn't know that I was depressed when I was 14, but I realized when I was 18 that when I was 14 I was depressed because I was still depressed when I was 18. And I started telling him about my depression. And I thought that by sharing, I thought I was still acting like I was his superior, like being the adult and sharing that I too suffered from depression. And then at some point, and I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point, we started, we switched roles in which I stopped being the one that was trying to support and comfort him, and he started supporting and comforting me. Throughout a lot of my career, certainly the last half, the last two-thirds of my career, I always spoke about the fact that the primary difference between the professionals in our company and the people receiving services from our company is that the professionals get paid and the people receiving the services either pay or have somebody pay on their behalf. That meaning that, we all have problems. It's not like the professionals are the ones who solve the problems of the people who are depressed, and the people who are depressed are the ones who have their problems solved by the professionals. That theoretically is true, and that's why the professionals get paid theoretically. But the reality is we are all interdependent, and professionals can't do their job unless the people receiving the services do their work. And the people doing their work sometimes can switch roles and be supportive and understanding and empathic toward the people, the professionals in their lives, because professionals also have problems. Professionals also have sick spouses, or a spouse, or they're getting a divorce, or they have a sick child, or whatever is challenging them. Everybody has challenges. So this idea that I'm a professional and you're a patient, well, sometimes I'm a professional, you're a patient, but sometimes I'm a patient too. And sometimes I'm just a person in need too. So being a professional doesn't mean I'm always giving and somebody else is always taking. Sometimes I need to take and somebody else needs to give to me. And that story that just reinforced it. I come back to that story so often. I don't know, he was 28. I was probably in my 50s at the time. And I was a PhD. I was a manager of a company at that time that had probably 2,000 employees, and I was making a lot of money. He barely had a part-time job, maybe working 5 or 10 hours a week, and probably minimum wage or maybe a couple of bucks above minimum wage. So if you looked at the objective criteria, I was one thing and he was my subordinate in so many ways. But when he started supporting me, he was my superior. Not in the sense that he was my boss, but in the sense that he was giving to me. It's not about who's more important. It's about who can help. One of the things I've learned by spending over 40 years working with people that are the most serious and complex behavioral challenges is that everybody has something to give. If you don't look for it, you may not see it. If you look for it, als men zocht, gefindt men. My grandmother would say in Yiddish, als men zocht, gefindt men. If you look, you find. Most people think, mentally ill, what do they have to contribute? They're just takers. Mentally, intellectually disabled, what do they have to give? They're just takers. They're a drag on society. They just use our resources. That's how most people think. And look, there is an aspect of truth to that. But it's fundamentally wrong because all people need other people. So all people are takers. And I think all people can be and should be and are givers if we give them the right opportunities. If we're open enough to open up our hands, and more importantly, to open up our hearts to other people who are less fortunate financially, intellectually, emotionally, physically, medically than we are, if we're open enough, we can accept gifts, support, love, understanding from them. They've got something to give too.
I love that. And as I'm thinking, I keep on thinking through, do not be a false witness, be a true witness. It's seeing that...
To be a true witness, you have to be a good observer. Open your eyes, your ears, open your nose, open your fingers, because we feel things with our fingers. Open your senses and take in what's really there. We all wear, back in the 60s when I was a kid, we talked about wearing rose-colored glasses. And it doesn't mean that you actually wore glasses that had rose lenses. It means that we all filter out so much of what we perceive. We see what we want to see. We see what we're looking for. We see what we expect to see. How about seeing what's really there? How about looking for what's really there? How about looking in the right places? The old story about somebody was looking for his lost wallet underneath the lamppost. And somebody says, well, why are you looking here? Why don't you spread out? He says, well, because there's light here. Yeah, but maybe it's not there. You looked there and you didn't find it. So now you got to go to the place where there is no light. And you got to look in other places. Don't look in the obvious places. Don't look in the places where you can see, where you expect to see. Look in the places where something might be there that's important, whether you expect it or not. Open yourself up. We are all so closed. We're all so squeezed. Breathe in, take a deep breath. Open your eyes, open your ears, open your heart. You don't see with your eyes. You don't hear with your ears. You don't smell with your nose. All your senses are perceived in your brain. Open your brain. Open your brain.
Well, there's one paradigm to look at the entire Ten Commandments. The authority brought you freedom, right? I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. I'm giving you freedom, and these are the guidances to freedom. And, well, that's freedom. What you just said is freedom.
A slave doesn't have the opportunity to see, to do, to hear, to interact the way he wants. That closes people in. When we close ourselves in, we reestablish those conditions of slavery. If God freed us from Mitzrayim and gave us the opportunity to be open, one could argue that it is a sin to be closed. Freedom is about opening up and being willing to accept other opinions, other ideas, other people, accept people that are imperfect. Why? Why should we accept people who are imperfect? Because everybody's imperfect. God is perfect and excellent. On our best days, we can be excellent, but we can never be perfect. Actually, that's not true. You can be perfect if you do something that's trivial. I don't like to say things bad about other people, but I want to illustrate my point. I once had an administrative assistant who was obsessive compulsive, and she would file perfectly, meaning she would go over her files every day and check them and recheck them and double check them and triple check them and make sure that all her files were perfect. Well, her files may have been perfect, but she accomplished so little because she was constantly doing it and redoing it or redoing it or redoing it and going over it again. She just didn't get to anything else. She didn't do what she needed to do because she was so obsessed about keeping her files perfectly. Unfortunately, I had to let her go because she wasn't productive enough. Perfection, to the extent that it's possible at all, is only possible on trivial activities. I'm not saying if somebody files properly, that's an important activity because we need to find now everything's done electronically. So it's, but you can still mess up electronic filing too. Actually, because electronic filing is so much more powerful, you can mess it up even more than hand filed things. So, don't think that just because we do it electronically, now it's perfect. Electronic files can be messed up royally. But bottom line is, human standard at best is excellence. That's what we might strive for. If we strive for something, we should strive for excellence, but not for perfection. God is both excellent and perfect. At best, we are excellent, which means, since at best we are excellent, that means sometimes we're not excellent. And even when we are excellent, we're not perfect, which means we still have problems. We still have issues. So if you only accept people because they always do what you think is the right thing to do, you got a problem because you're never going to accept anybody. Because nobody's going to always do what you think is the right thing. If you spend your time figuring out all the bad things that your spouse and your children and your neighbor and your boss and all the bad things that they do, you're going to be an unhappy person. Better to spend time in how do I improve my relationship? How do I make myself a better person? How do I get closer to being excellent? Not closer to being perfect, but closer to being excellent. It's we say in Jewish philosophy a very simple expression, but it's so profound. Mahu afata. Just as he, God, is, so should we be. So it seems really simple. Okay, so God is good, so we should be good. That's pretty simple. God is merciful, so we should be merciful. That's pretty a little more complicated, but it's still pretty simple. But no, it's not simple at all. And it certainly does not mean just as God is perfectly merciful, we should be perfectly merciful. And just as God perfectly loves every one of us, we should perfectly love each other. That's not what Mahu Afata, so is he, so shall you be. That is not what that means. It means just as he is perfectly merciful, so we should try to be more merciful. And just as he is perfectly loving of all his creations, so should we try to love his creations better. Our spouses, our children, our friends, our family, our community members. It's not about being perfect like God. It's being as close to God as we can get, which is never very close at all. But closer is better than further.
Um, the last question I have, which I feel we've really touched on, is, taking, maybe we could give this disposition a name. Let's call it the open disposition. Open to truth. Actually, open to truth. How does that apply to our relationship with God and with ourselves? I always like that paradigm that we relate to ourselves, we relate to others, and we relate to God. How do we think about ourselves that way, and how do we think about God that way?
So I guess there's many different ways to answer that question. I'll answer it one way, and it's just one of many ways. And that is when I was a teenager, like so many teenagers looking for answers, had a lot of questions, like so many teenagers looking for answers. Didn't find, like most teenagers, didn't find them. Uh, Many of us kept looking as adults. And pretty long ago, I mean, again, I'm 75 years old, so I've had the benefit of many years, many decades of experience. One of the things that I've done is I've decided to leave many questions unanswered. Leave the questions open. Is it really necessary to answer every good question? The Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Ruderman, and many others have used a similar expression, I'm sure. We used to say in Yiddish, "Von a kasha starbt man nicht." From a question, you don't pass away. You can have a question, even if you don't have an answer, you don't have to fall on your sword. Some questions have to be left open. And the bigger the question, the more likely it is that you have to leave it open. Why do bad things happen to good people? I don't know. And I'm 75. I'm never going to know. So I kept saying, don't give up on this. I'm not saying I'm giving up, but I'm willing to wait because I do believe that there is life after death, that, hopefully we're good people and God will receive us in the hereafter. And my guess is maybe all these big open questions hopefully they'll get answered. I anticipate they probably will. And I'm willing to wait. So it's not that I've given up, but I've given up on my ability to answer these big questions. The question is so much better than every answer that I've heard and every answer that I've come up with. So I'm willing to accept that there are some things that are just bigger than I am. Actually, there are a lot of things that are bigger than I am. Maybe we should leave it on that thought.
That's amazing. I love that. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today. And, that's the beauty of talking, of questioning, of digging into these, matters. And it started with that story. Let's go back to, I don't know if you remember his name, but,
No, Lord, his
no,
name didn't really matter.
no,
It was his testimony mattered. His name, not so important.
it's his good, his merit.
His merit. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.